As it turns out, the Reverend Rands' criticism of Smarden was actually to do with the condition of the church and churchyard, which he thought were disorderly. Nevertheless, a village as old as Smarden could at times, understandably and sometimes forgivably, behave in a disorderly manner, and these lapses, which were of varying degrees of seriousness, from treason and murder to affrays of various kinds, were there in the archives for us to contemplate and even to judge, should we wish. Bear in mind, though, that in our archives we sometimes have just small snippets of information, making a story hard to piece together. But these events still give us a glimpse of law and order in Smarden over the centuries. So, let's start with Smarden's very first recorded episode of disorder, an event which took place way back in the year 1241 during the reign of King Henry III. It shines a light on the way in which the law was upheld and the responsibility of ordinary people to enforce it. At the time, any person who had been wronged had a duty to raise the hue and cry, by which all villagers were bound by law to turn out and give chase, and to apprehend the suspect. However, if the cry was not raised, then the village itself became in breach of the law, and the community would suffer a heavy fine. This is what happened in Smarden that year, because when a wealthy lady named Isabella was robbed, she had for her own reasons failed to raise the cry. So the head man in the village, Nicholas of Romden, knowing his community was faced with paying a heavy penalty, arrested and held Isabella, most likely as surety for the impending fine. "9 years later, and another fine for negligence was heading Smarden's way. A convicted cattle thief named Alan de Radingate escaped from custody at Pennenden Heath and found his way here, where he sought sanctuary in Smarden's old church. This happened 100 years before the present one was built. Under the law, he could have remained safe there for 40 days, always under the watchful eye of the village. But once again, Smarden seems to have messed up somewhat, and Alan was able to escape a second time, leaving the village to pay for its negligence, along with the good people of Pennenden Heath for their earlier carelessness. Moving on, Smarden, it seems, was never slow to step up and join in a rebellion, and was, on 3 occasions, involved in treasonable acts. Perhaps this is why our village was once called the Smarden Republic. First, in 1381, during Wat Tyler's Rebellion, which is also called the Peasants' Revolt, John Warner of Smarden was accused of looting Maidstone Jail, freeing all the inmates and destroying the prisoners' records. Next, in 1450, Smarden supplied an astonishing number of men, nearly 100, and the largest contingent of any village in Kent, to support Jack Cade's rebellion over corruption and abuses of power. Later they were all pardoned. Since 94 men represents around half of the working age population of Smarden, it seems unlikely that so many left to join Cade, and it is possible that names were added to the list afterwards to secure the protection of pardons for as many villagers as possible. Finally, in 1554, 34 Smarden men joined Sir Thomas Wyatt's failed attack on London, caused by Queen Mary's determination to marry the Catholic King of Spain, which resulted in Wyatt's execution along with 90 rebels. We do not know the fate of the Smarden contingent, but it seems we were good at picking fights, but not so good at picking winners. In 1626, for the first time, the village installed a pillory in the marketplace and later the stocks, which remained in place until 1864. In 1640, the village became both disturbed and disordered by the behaviour of John Terry, its curate, and got up a petition to Parliament for his removal. They had 3 complaints. First, neglect of his duty, by being frequently absent from Sunday services and being drunk at burials. Second, of being habitually drunk in unlicensed alehouses, and of being found lying in the gutter, incapable of standing up, and then to be carried home by 2 villagers. Finally, he was accused of fighting, even at the church door, and of striking both men and women. Unfortunately, the archives do not tell us whether the petition was successful. In 1840, a tragic murder happened at the Old White Horse pub, opposite the Chequers, when a young chimney sweep named John Bell drunkenly gambled away the tools of his trade. He went into the store next door and purchased a knife, returned to the pub, and fatally stabbed the local farmer, William Munn. At his trial, the more humane Victorian approach to sentencing meant that instead of being hanged, young Bell was deported for life. The following year, any peace which might have existed in our village was suddenly shattered by the arrival of an army of labourers who were engaged in building the new railway line from London across the northern side of the parish. 400 of these hard-drinking men lived at a camp at Heg Hill, and would descend on our village pubs where so much trouble broke out that Smarden decided it needed a lock-up. A wooden one was built and placed in the village centre at Cage Lane, which is how the street name originated. It still stands in the garden at a private address in the village. The story goes that the drunks locked up in the cage were supplied more liquor by their friends, who would pour whisky to them through the window bars down an old-style clay pipe. According to Smarden historian Halford Mills, the stocks held no terror to them. He described them as strong, coarse, undisciplined, unprincipled, and violent, led by gangers of more strength and less principle than themselves. He went on to say of Smarden that previously a capable labourer could feed his family for 6 months on fur and leather, and a further 6 months on fin and eel. But after the arrival of these men, who were all skilled poachers, there was nothing to be had a mile either side of the track. To make the point, he says that the village owned 8 packs of beagles before this invasion, but all were disbanded due to lack of wildlife. This picture shows navvies removing soil from an excavation in wheelbarrows. They would start off at a run to gather momentum, which gives rise to the phrase, making the running. For the last of our chronicles of disorderly behaviour, we go to April the 5th in the year 1859, where Heg Hill is again the scene of violence of a different kind. A few days earlier, 3 or 4 strangers had been seen looking around the village, and it later became clear that they were trying to find a suitable spot for a fight. On the 5th of April, 2 private trains from London stopped on a siding at Heg Hill, and a crowd, said to number 2,000, and to include the Prince of Wales, disembarked. They had come to watch and gamble on an illegal bare-knuckle fight between Tom Sayers, champion of England, and Bill Benjamin of Wales, for the blue ribbon of the prize ring. The stake was £200, and Sayers backed himself with a further £200 to win within 20 minutes. Tom Sayers was a 5 feet 8 inch tall bricklayer from Brighton who fought the early part of his career as a middleweight. The Heg Hill fight lasted 11 rounds, and Sayers won after 22 minutes, so losing his wager. A second fight then took place between Bob Travers and Mike Madden, which lasted 35 rounds and over 2 hours. At this point the police arrived, and the fighters and crowd, warned by a young Edwin Offen, who was perched in a tree on lookout, hastily reboarded the train and returned to London. The policemen who arrived at Heg Hill to stop the fight were members of Kent's new 222-man strong constabulary, which had been formed just 2 years earlier. Before this time it would theoretically have fallen to the village constable, Tom Offen, to intervene. The police officers would have worn a uniform of a frock coat and a high hat and carried a truncheon and a rattle to summon assistance. Here we end this account of our disorderly village, better known today for its peace, harmony and strong community spirit.